I never imagined that the man I loved, the man I trusted with my whole heart, would force me to make a choice that shattered my soul. But that night, everything changed. As I stood frozen in the living room, hearing his words, I knew this wasn't love anymore. It was control. And the two strangers he invited into our home? They were about to push me past every boundary I thought I had. I always thought Noah and I had the kind of relationship people envied. We were high school sweethearts who had grown up together, building a life filled with love, laughter, and shared dreams. Noah was charming, thoughtful, and had a way of making me feel like the only woman in the world. At least, that's who he used to be. When we first moved in together, everything felt perfect. Late-night talks, spontaneous road trips, and lazy Sunday mornings were our norm. I felt safe with him, like I'd finally found my forever. But looking back, maybe I ignored the signs. At first, the changes were subtle. He started working late more often, always glued to his phone, brushing off my questions with a quick, just work stuff. The easy conversations we once had turned into cold silences or sarcastic remarks that left me second-guessing myself. I told myself it was normal, just the stress of life catching up with us. But soon his behavior shifted. Noah began questioning my choices, what I wore, who I talked to, and how I spent my time. It wasn't outright controlling, but it felt like little pieces of my independence were slipping away. I wanted to believe he still loved me, but doubt started creeping in. The night everything changed started like any other. We were having dinner at home, and Noah seemed different. Relaxed, almost too happy, like he'd been waiting for this moment. I thought maybe he had a surprise planned, a trip or a gift to reignite the spark we'd lost. Instead, his words knocked the air out of my lungs. "I think we need something new to bring us closer," he said, his voice calm and certain. I stared at him, waiting for him to explain. When he finally did, my stomach twisted. He wanted to invite 2 of his friends into our bedroom, to experiment, as he called it. I felt the ground disappear beneath me. I tried to laugh it off, thinking it was a bad joke. But his eyes told me he was serious. That night, my safe and loving relationship turned into something dark and unrecognizable. The days after Noah's shocking proposal felt like living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I tried to convince myself that he didn't mean it, that maybe it was some twisted joke or a moment of bad judgment. But as the hours ticked by, his words kept echoing in my mind, suffocating me. I started noticing things I had ignored before. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, and the way he suddenly seemed more distant, yet oddly excited. He wasn't acting like the man I fell in love with. Instead, it was like I was living with a stranger. Every time I tried to bring it up, he brushed me off. "Emma, you're overthinking this. Stop being so dramatic," he'd snap, his tone sharp and dismissive. But I couldn't let it go. My heart wouldn't let me. One evening, I saw him texting someone, his expression dark and focused. When I asked who it was, he looked up, annoyed. "Work stuff," he said, flipping his phone face down. The lies were piling up, and I could feel them crushing me. The man who once held my hand during scary movies and whispered promises of forever now looked at me like I was just another obstacle to his plans. I started questioning myself. Was I being unreasonable? Was this my fault? Maybe I wasn't enough for him anymore. That's when the guilt started creeping in. But then there were the moments that felt even darker. The subtle threats disguised as sweet words. "This is what we need, Emma," he'd whisper at night, pulling me close. "It's time to try something new. Don't you want to make me happy?" The way he said it made my skin crawl. I spent sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, imagining the faces of the strangers he wanted to bring into our home. I pictured them standing in my living room, looking at me like I was nothing more than an object to be shared. And the worst part, Noah didn't even see what he was asking of me as wrong. By Thursday night, the tension was unbearable. He came home late again, smelling faintly of alcohol and something I couldn't place. When I asked where he'd been, he smirked. "Final preparations," he said, his voice dripping with excitement. That was when the panic really set in. I tried to talk to him, to make him see reason. "We can fix this," I pleaded. "We don't need to do this. Let's go to therapy, take a trip, anything but this." But he just shook his head. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Emma. It's happening. You need to decide if you're with me or not." An ultimatum. I felt like my world was spinning out of control. Noah was no longer the man I knew, and I couldn't understand how he'd turned into someone so cold, so manipulative. Friday night arrived faster than I expected. I stood in front of the mirror, trying to recognize the woman staring back at me. My hands were trembling, my stomach twisted in knots. I wanted to run, but Noah's words kept playing in my head. If you love me, you'll do this. The doorbell rang, and my heart dropped. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading. I heard Noah's voice, cheerful and welcoming, as he let them in. I stayed frozen in the bedroom, terrified to step out. But I knew there was no more hiding. I had to face what was coming. I stepped out of the bedroom, my legs trembling beneath me. The living room felt different, smaller, darker, suffocating. Noah's friends, Mark and Ryan, stood casually by the couch, their laughter echoing off the walls. They looked too comfortable, too at ease, as if this moment had been planned for weeks. Noah's eyes lit up when he saw me, and he waved me over like we were about to start some kind of game. There she is, he said with a grin, his hand reaching for mine. I didn't move. My stomach twisted as I felt their eyes on me, curious, hungry, amused. I crossed my arms over my chest, trying to hide the way my body was shaking. Noah noticed. He leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear. Relax, Emma. This is going to be good for us. His words were supposed to be reassuring, but they only made me feel more trapped. Mark handed me a drink, his fingers brushing mine for just a second too long. I flinched, pulling my hand away quickly. Sorry, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I sipped the drink out of desperation, hoping it would calm my nerves, but it only made the room feel heavier. Noah started talking, laughing, acting like this was just another Friday night with friends. Meanwhile, I felt like I was drowning. Mark sat beside me on the couch, too close, his knee brushing against mine. You're tense, he said softly. You don't have to be. His voice sent chills down my spine. I shifted away, but Noah shot me a look, a warning. Emma, he said, his voice steady but sharp. Don't be rude. I froze. The man who once protected me now felt like a stranger I couldn't trust. Ryan joined the conversation, his voice smooth, but I barely heard him. My focus was on Noah, the way he kept watching me, measuring my reactions. He wasn't just pushing my boundaries, he was testing me. Mark reached for my hand again, this time holding it firmly. You're beautiful, you know that? I pulled my hand back, my pulse racing. Noah, I said, my voice breaking. Can we talk? Alone. His expression hardened, and for a moment, I thought he'd refuse. But then he stood, motioning for me to follow him into the kitchen. What the hell, Emma? He hissed, his voice low and sharp. I felt the tears threatening to spill. I can't do this, I whispered. This isn't right. Please don't make me. He grabbed my wrist, not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to make me stop talking. You promised me, he said. You said you'd try. I never promised, I shot back. I begged you not to do this, but you didn't care. His eyes darkened, and for the first time I saw anger there. Not frustration, but real anger. Maybe this was a mistake, he muttered, letting go of my wrist and running a hand through his hair. But we're already here. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I stared at him, searching for the man I used to love, but all I saw was someone I didn't recognize. Before I could speak, Mark walked in. Everything okay? Noah straightened, putting on a smile that didn't match the tension in the room. Yeah, we're fine, he said quickly. Mark's gaze lingered on me. You sure about this, Emma? He asked, his voice softer than I expected. Noah's jaw tightened. She's fine. But I wasn't fine. I couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in, and I knew if I didn't leave now, I never would. I turned to Noah one last time, my voice shaking. I'm sorry, I said. I can't do this. The room fell silent. Mark and Ryan exchanged awkward glances, but Noah's eyes burned with anger. You're unbelievable, he spat. After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me? His words cut deep, but I held my ground. No, I said firmly. You don't get to control me. Not anymore. For a moment, I thought he might try to stop me. But instead, he turned away, slamming his glass down on the counter. Mark and Ryan quietly slipped out, and I grabbed my coat, my heart racing as I stepped outside into the cold night air. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. My heart pounded in my chest as I stepped off the porch, leaving Noah and the nightmare behind me. I didn't have a plan, just the overwhelming urge to run. My mind replayed the last hour like a broken record. Noah's angry glare, Mark's lingering touch, and the suffocating weight of being trapped. I had finally stood up for myself, but the fear hadn't left. I walked aimlessly, my breath visible in the cold air, until I found myself standing in front of Olivia's apartment building. Olivia had been my best friend since college, the one person who knew me better than I knew myself. I hesitated before knocking, but within seconds, the door swung open. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Emma? What's wrong? The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. Without a word, she pulled me inside and shut the door behind me. Through choked sobs, I told her everything. How Noah had changed, how he'd manipulated me, and how tonight was supposed to end. Her face shifted from shock to rage as she listened. "That's not love, Emma," she said, her voice trembling. "That's abuse. Emotional, psychological, whatever you want to call it. He doesn't deserve you." I nodded, but her words didn't make it easier. "I loved him," I whispered. "How did it get this bad?" She hugged me tightly. "Because you trusted him. And he took advantage of that." I spent the night on her couch, replaying every moment, every red flag I had ignored. The control disguised as concern, the jealousy masked as love, it all seemed so clear now. But the hardest part wasn't leaving, it was facing what came next. The next morning my phone buzzed. It was Noah. "Noah, where are you? Come home so we can fix this. I love you." I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. Olivia saw my expression and grabbed the phone. "Don't. Block him." But I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I texted back. "There's nothing to fix. I'm done." The phone rang almost immediately, but I didn't answer. The voicemail came through seconds later. "Emma, don't do this. You're overreacting. It was just one night, one experience. It didn't mean anything. Come back, and we'll figure this out." But I wasn't overreacting. For the first time in months, I saw things clearly. Later that afternoon, Olivia and I drove back to the house to grab my things. I dreaded seeing Noah again, but when we pulled up, his car was gone. Relief washed over me. I packed quickly, shoving clothes and essentials into bags while Olivia kept watch. But just as we were about to leave, Noah's car pulled into the driveway. My stomach dropped. He got out, his expression dark and stormy. "Emma," he called out, his voice sharp. "What the hell are you doing?" I stood my ground, but my voice trembled. "I'm leaving, Noah. It's over." He laughed, a bitter sound that sent chills down my spine. "You're being ridiculous. You're not thinking straight. Come inside and we'll talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You're really going to throw everything away? For what? One bad night?" I swallowed hard, forcing myself to hold his gaze. "No, Noah. For every night you made me feel small. For every time you made me question my worth. For turning our love into something ugly." For the first time, he looked rattled. His confidence wavered, and I saw something else in his eyes, fear. "You'll regret this," he said, his voice softer now. "You'll miss me." I didn't respond. Instead, Olivia stepped between us. "She's done, Noah. Let her go." With that, I turned and walked away. But it wasn't over. Not yet. For weeks, Noah tried to reach me, calls, texts, even showing up at Olivia's place. His messages swung between apologies and anger, begging and blame. It took everything in me to stay strong, but I knew I had no choice. One night, he left a voicemail that sent shivers down my spine. "If I can't have you, no one will." That's when I knew it was time to take real action. I filed for a restraining order the next morning. The process was terrifying, telling strangers the most intimate and humiliating details of my relationship. But I did it because I had to. When the papers were served, Noah's response was explosive. He showed up at my work, shouting and begging me to talk to him. Security had to escort him out. That was the moment I knew he wasn't just dangerous. He was broken. And I couldn't fix him. I spent weeks rebuilding my life, cutting ties and blocking every attempt he made to contact me. It wasn't easy, but each day I felt stronger, more like myself again. And then one afternoon, Olivia handed me a letter. "It's from Noah," she said cautiously. I hesitated before opening it. "Emma, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I hurt you and I hate myself for it. I hope one day you can forgive me. But if you can't, I understand. Just know I'll always love you." I folded the letter and threw it away. Because I had finally learned the most important lesson of all: love isn't supposed to hurt. The days after leaving Noah felt like walking through a storm, raw, chaotic, and endlessly uncertain. I couldn't sleep without replaying the last moments in that house, his voice ringing in my ears. Part of me wondered if I'd made a mistake. Had I overreacted? Was I too quick to give up on the man I thought I'd spend forever with? But every time doubt crept in, I remembered the look in his eyes when he gave me that ultimatum, cold, unfeeling, and calculating. That wasn't love. That was control. I stayed with Olivia for a while, trying to rebuild the pieces of my life. I quit my job, terrified that Noah might show up there again. I changed my number and blocked him on every platform. But no matter how many barriers I put up, I couldn't escape the feeling that he was still watching me, still waiting for me to break and come crawling back. One night, I woke up to a pounding on Olivia's door. My heart nearly stopped. "Emma, open up." Noah's voice. Olivia rushed to the door, her phone in hand. "Leave Noah," she shouted. "Or I'm calling the police." He didn't budge. "I just need to talk to her." His voice cracked. "Please, Emma, just talk to me." I stood frozen in the hallway, my legs trembling. Olivia wasn't having it. "You're scaring her. Leave now." Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he left. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat down on the couch, shaking uncontrollably as Olivia wrapped me in a blanket and held me. The next morning, I went to the police station and filed another report. The restraining order was updated, and I was advised to move somewhere safer. That's when I decided it was time to let go of everything tied to Noah, including the city we had called home. Packing up my life and leaving behind everything familiar was one of the hardest decisions I'd ever made. But it was also the most freeing. I moved to a small town a few hours away, rented a tiny apartment, and started fresh. No one knew me there, and for the first time in months I felt like I could breathe again. But healing wasn't easy. I still jumped at shadows, still panicked every time my phone buzzed. The memories didn't disappear overnight. I struggled with guilt for leaving him, guilt for not seeing the signs sooner, and guilt for allowing myself to be manipulated for so long. Therapy helped. Slowly, I started to understand that what happened wasn't my fault. I learned to let go of the shame and focus on rebuilding my confidence. I started painting again, something I hadn't done in years. I joined a book club and forced myself to meet new people, even when it felt impossible. And I learned to trust myself again. Months passed and the nightmares began to fade. Noah's texts stopped, his calls disappeared, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt safe. But closure didn't come easily. One afternoon, while scrolling through social media, I saw a picture of him, smiling, laughing with another woman. My stomach dropped. Had he moved on so easily? Did what we had even matter to him? But then I looked closer. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I realized then that Noah hadn't changed. He was still looking for someone to fill the void he refused to face within himself. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt relief. Because I was free. Free from his manipulation, his control, and his need to define my worth. And as hard as it was to walk away, I knew I'd made the right decision. The fallout of loving someone like Noah wasn't just about losing him, it was about losing myself. But in leaving him, I found something far more important. I found me. I wouldn't let one broken relationship define me. I wouldn't let the scars keep me from believing in love again. But this time, I'd make sure it was real. The kind of love that lifts you up, not tears you down. Months turned into seasons, and slowly, the cracks in my heart began to heal. Moving away from Noah wasn't just about leaving a toxic relationship. It was about reclaiming my identity. I no longer woke up dreading what the day might bring. Instead, I felt lighter, like I was finally breathing for the first time in years. Therapy became my safe space, a place where I learned to process the fear, the guilt, and the shame I carried for far too long. I stopped blaming myself for staying as long as I did. Love had blinded me, but that didn't make me weak. It made me human. One of the hardest lessons I learned was that love should never feel like a test. It should never make you question your worth or force you to sacrifice your boundaries. Real love doesn't manipulate or control. It nurtures and protects. It took time, but I stopped checking my phone, waiting for Noah's name to appear. I stopped replaying his words in my head and wondering if I could have done something differently. Because the truth was, there was nothing I could have done to save us. Noah didn't want love, he wanted power. I started focusing on the little things that made me feel whole again, painting, reading, and long walks along the lake. I found joy in my independence, in knowing I was enough on my own. One day, while sitting by the water, I thought about the version of me that had walked out of Noah's house that night, broken, terrified, and unsure if I could survive without him. And then I thought about the woman I had become, strong, confident, and unwilling to settle for anything less than I deserved. I wasn't the same person anymore, and I was proud of that. Looking back, I realized that walking away from Noah wasn't just about leaving him, it was about choosing myself. And that choice had saved me. I know now that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. Trust isn't something to be begged for, it's something to be earned. And love should make you feel safe, not scared. To anyone who's ever felt trapped in a relationship that made them question their worth, I want you to know it's okay to leave. It's okay to say no, even to someone you thought you'd spend your life with. Walking away doesn't mean you failed. It means you chose yourself. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that choosing yourself is the bravest thing you can ever do. If you've ever faced a moment where love turned into control, I want to hear your story. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done in Emma's place? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more real-life stories that will leave you speechless. And stay tuned. Our next story might just be even more shocking than this one. Hit that notification bell so you never miss it.